So, as I said, my name is Nitay Joffe. I'm the founder and CTO of ActionIQ. We're a stealth mode company, which essentially means that there's not really anything about us out there. In fact, this is actually the first public talk we're giving, so I'm very excited to be here today. A little bit about us and what we're doing. So, start off with my background. I'm what I would call a big data geek. Several years ago, I was at a company called PowerSet, and we built this linguistic search engine, and the main thing that you guys have probably heard of that came out of that is we created this NoSQL data store to store our crawl data, and that is what is now known as HBase, which is used by many of you probably today. Since then, I joined Facebook and was tasked with a lot of their graph analytics. And specifically, we built a system called Apache Giraffe, which was basically used by Facebook to do a lot of the social networking analysis, inference on your friends, and so on and so forth. And we've since open sourced that as well, and that is also used to do a lot of large-scale graph analytics. My co-founder, Tasso Argyros, was the founder of Aster Data. For those of you that are not familiar, Aster Data built one of the first sort of enterprise MPP class databases, and in particular, they had a lot of very interesting IP around how you actually can take SQL and MapReduce and actually do them together, not as two completely different workflows. So, as you can tell, we have a lot of this sort of data background, and one thing that we've seen time and time again is the difficulty of taking a very cool, exciting, innovative technology, selling it to a customer, and then actually seeing at the end of the day the real business value. There's always some gap in there between taking your amazing technology and getting a business user to actually use it and drive business value out of it. And that's some of what I'll be going into today. And in particular, the space that we've chosen to focus on is marketing. And I'm going to show you why marketing and how it's actually all about data at the end of the day. And so, specifically a little bit about marketing, I often get asked this question of why marketing. Back when I was in college, we had this Frisbee team, and the Frisbee team liked to party a lot. And it sort of became known that it was a Frisbee team with a drinking problem. In reality, it was a drinking team with a Frisbee problem. I like to think of ActionIQ as a data company with a marketing problem. So let's dive in a bit and see. And sorry, one final note. We're very fortunate to have some of the world's best investors working with us, including Matt himself. So let's dive in a bit. Okay, let's dive in a bit and see why marketing is all about data today. So to start things off, consumers today are more in control than ever before. As I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, there's app blocking tools, Gmail priority inbox, spam filtering, and so on and so forth. The main point here is the only way to actually get the attention of your customers is to give them the personalized experience they desire. That's the only way that they're actually going to view your messages. And recommendations are one aspect of this. So, Amazon and Netflix do a great job of recommending things to you, but that's really just one slice of the entire customer journey and their workflow with your brand. So, secondly, one thing that we've seen is today there's a lot of focus on getting new customers. And so what you're seeing here is sort of the leaky bucket metaphor. And so the water here represents your customer base. And today all the effort is going into essentially filling the bucket, spending as much as you can on ads to just get more and more water in the bucket. The reality is nobody's looking at all the holes that the bucket has and thinking about, well, how do I plug in those holes? And that if there was more focus on that, you could actually get a lot more value and do it in a much cheaper way. Part of the reason that this isn't being done as much or as well is because this is a huge data problem where the only way to do this effectively is to really understand your customers' preferences and their behavioral patterns and to target very specifically to them. So why is this difficult today? What you see here is sort of a typical enterprise data layout. And so going from the top down, at the top you have the various execution channels. So this might be like your email, mobile, and so on and so forth. Traditionally, each one of these has had a data mart built specifically for it. So for example, mobile has a mobile data mart, and so on and so forth. And those at the end of the day are fed with your first-party, back-of-the-warehouse systems somehow. But there isn't really a unified path for across all of them. And so today, a marketer, this is one thing that we've heard from one of our customers, is that today a marketer essentially has to think top down. They have to start with saying, okay, I'm going to run a mobile campaign. And then from that, they have this sliver of data that they're allowed to use for the mobile campaign. In reality, the way they actually think and the way they actually want to do things is think bottom up. Think, I have high-value customers. I want to find ones that haven't purchased in the last month. And then according to those, maybe some of them I'll send an email. Some of them maybe mobile is better. Some of them maybe might respond to a discount, so on and so forth. And so effectively, with all this data and all this data marts, essentially to the business user, the way they see all this is something like this. So the only way to really get all the underlying wealth of data that your business probably already has is really to dive in deep and get access to the first-party data warehouse. And the only way to effectively do that today is through essentially SQL. To the business user, this is the exact wrong interface, right? I mean, this is like learning a foreign language. And not only do you need to know the basics of SQL, you really have to dive in and understand various different kinds of joins, window functions, aggregations, so on and so forth. The bottom right one is one of my favorite tasks as an interview question. And so once they have a working knowledge of SQL, you think you're sort of done at that point. The reality is that's just the beginning. Because once you understand this, what you really need to understand is this. This is your data warehouse's data model. And so even though you know SQL, you don't necessarily know what the exact column means, what those values are, how they join with other columns, and so on and so forth. One of the examples I have from another one of our customers today is they have a lot of core business concepts that they reuse and plug and play a lot. For example, they have a notion of a valid order. And to a business user, a valid order is just that. It's an order that they consider to be valid and can therefore use it in larger campaigns and components and so on. Underneath, to the data analyst and the engineer, a valid order actually contains a whole bunch of logic, like that the order wasn't fraud or canceled, that it wasn't a free promotion giveaway, so on and so forth. The problem to the marketer, A, is understanding this and writing those queries, as we said, but B is that they're not the owner or the maintainer of this. And so as soon as a data engineer goes and the model changes, which happens, all of that breaks, right? All of the queries that they're writing break very quickly. And so, so the way they actually interact with this most of the time is they get a data analyst to help them with their job. They pull in the engineer, they pull in the experts, they say, hey, can you help me with this? Which to the data analyst feels something like this. And the problem here is that data analysts are very sophisticated, ML, statistics, PhDs, and so on. And they've been hired to, move the needle for the business by developing very complex models. But instead, they're being utilized today basically to be list pull monkeys, quote unquote, serving the marketer, serving the business user just by doing these menial tasks, as opposed to spending their time doing what's actually really valuable. So part of the landscape today of marketing systems is essentially causes the marketer to be stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so in the upper left, you see a suite of BI systems, Hadoop, Spark, and so on and so forth. These are the systems that really have the rich data capabilities. The problem is there's no execution component, which right away takes out most of marketing, because if you can't do any action, you're not really actually doing anything. And as we said before, they don't have the right interface to require you to dive into SQL and so on. And so marketers most of the time spend their time in the bottom right, which is the execution systems. These lack the data richness of the top left. For example, trying to get clickstream data into one of those kinds of systems, good luck. They're also isolated by their very nature, as we saw in the data layout table. And so it's hard to drive a true sort of cross-channel campaign and to do that same bottom-up thinking that I described. So this is where ActionIQ really comes in, is we are building the sort of best of both worlds, the blend of the two. And so we will integrate with the execution systems, but we give you the power of something like a BI system, the data richness of Hadoop or Spark and so on, but we also present it in a way that marketers enjoy using, they use themselves, and we'll get into some of that. This is one thing that you see all the way down to our company culture. I spend just as much time recruiting database PhDs as I do product and UX designers. It's a very interesting mix. So let's take a look at a typical workflow and dive into a little bit of the technology of what's going on under the hood. So say I'm a marketer, I want to run a campaign on people who saw my ad on the web, then they browsed the product, but they didn't end up purchasing it. This is clearly a very simple example, but also a very realistic one that builds up to bigger things. So they work with their data analyst or engineer, and they come up with SQL that looks something roughly like this. Already here you see an example of what I'm saying, which is the idea of didn't purchase, that notion of lack of event, is something that can get tricky in SQL because there's no single row that tells you this user did not purchase. You have to actually do a left join and so on and so forth, and to see that essentially that user did not have any items in there. Okay, so this looks all well and good. And they run this, they expect everything to go fine, except what they get is something like this, which of course. Now, what's going on under the hood, and why is this so slow? Well, they go to the data engineer, they talk to them, and they see what's going on, and they realize that really what's going on under the hood is something like this. And what this means is, essentially, in order to do this query, you've got to take 3 of probably some of the largest tables you have, join them together, multiply out that data set, and then in order to filter down and find the specific users. This is much more expensive than just doing a simple query on people whose birthdays in a particular week. But the important point to really understand here is, to a business user, that shouldn't matter. To the data engineer and the database and so on and so forth, that matters. But to a business user, this query versus a birthday week query should be just the same. Now, this is a well-known problem, and in fact, it's been somewhat solved before. We just need a thing called cubes. This is a well-known data warehouse paradigm where essentially, because events are too complicated and too hard to process in their raw form and arbitrarily join, you pre-aggregate and build these cubes that represent the state of questions you want to ask. So a typical example might be, I build a cube, a 3-dimensional cube, that for all my users summarizes by their gender, their age, and the number of orders. And then once I have that cube, I can run a query like the one below very efficiently. This works all well and nice until something has to change. For example, once a business user runs this, it naturally opens them up to many more questions. Well, how many users were female, and the number of orders of shoes in particular was greater than 3? And now they want to ask that. Well, guess what? The cube can't handle it. It wasn't built for that. They have to go back to the data analyst, or more likely the engineer, and essentially you have to go and change the pipeline. For those of you that have been there, done that, know that this is something you stay away from as much as you can, because this takes on the order of weeks to months. And so the core problem here is that although cubes reduce the complexity of the queries, they essentially solve the problem by, the way I think of it is you're trading engineering time for people time, because any time that you want to experiment and try something new, you have to get more people involved to change the code, to change the cubes, and so on and so forth. So this is one thing specifically that we do not do in ActionIQ. In fact, part of the way that we've designed ActionIQ is really based on a paper that's a favorite of mine called End of an Era. It was written by Michael Stonebreaker, who's sort of the godfather of PhDs. In fact, he just won the Turing Award this year for a lot of his work. And in this paper that was written about, I think, 10 years ago, he basically predicted that in the old world, where you essentially had a single database that sort of did everything, was coming to an end. And that really the new wave of systems and requirements would require a specific database for specific needs. And since then, his paper has essentially been proven correct, because now we have streaming systems, we have data warehouses, we have array databases, so on and so forth. This is some of the pillars of what's going on underneath the hood in ActionIQ, is essentially we've built a specialized database to handle those kinds of event queries that you see. And as part of what we're doing is there's no ETL anywhere in our system, and I'll get into a little more of what that means. One way I like to think of our database is essentially you can kind of imagine it like a mix between a graph database and a relational one, and that it sort of allows the mix of both workloads. And so what we do in ActionIQ, or rather what we don't do in ActionIQ, is aggregate data or do any sorts of cubes. And I mean this when I say that every single event that you bring into our system can be queried as that single event, raw, live, and so on and so forth. And because we never aggregate or ETL the data, it makes it very easy to be very flexible and experiment and rapidly change, which is a core requirement. Finally, on the tech, one thing that we do that is sort of a new modern technique is what's called runtime schema binding. And essentially what this comes down to is allowing you to send us data before you even describe what the schema of it looks like. And this is enabled by some of the no aggregations and the raw event stuff that we do. And this has allowed us to make it very easy to plug into, for example, execution systems. We have a whole barrage of them, and we can whip them up in an order of hours to days. Because we don't prescribe any particular data model, it's very easy for us to fit with any data model. So finally, I don't have any demo for you guys today. As I mentioned, we're in stealth mode. So unfortunately, there's not too much I can show. But there's a few key points I wanted to make here. And the main one is that we designed ActionIQ's product to essentially be like playing with Legos. So the analyst defines the initial data or business logic. This happens once at deployment time or any time something changes. And again, as I said before, because of the lack of aggregations, anytime this business logic changes, it right away propagates to the rest of the system. No pipeline, nothing to change, so on. Those core components can then be composed to larger and larger business ideas or concepts, things like the valid order that I mentioned before. And finally, the marketer can use that to build their beautiful marketing sculptures in a very easy and intuitive way. No SQL, no MapReduce, none of that kind of stuff. So to finish things off, I have this great cartoon. As you can tell, I'm a Dilbert fan. So to finish things off, as I mentioned, we've basically taken a page out of Stonebraker's book, and we've built a database that is highly specialized for the particular marketing use case. And we've gone beyond that to understand that just building the database and the IT solution is really not enough. In order to solve the problem, you need to look cohesively at the whole workflow. And that is exactly what we're doing here. And by looking at the whole workflow, you enable marketers to be more self-service, you enable analysts to actually be analysts and analyze, and you do it all with a beautiful interface that they can use every day. Final plug, we're actively hiring. If you're at all interested in building databases with a purpose, or building beautiful product that allows you to query something like an innovative database without any SQL know-how, come talk to me. I'd love to chat.
Thank you very much. That was terrific. So before I open up to questions, maybe a word on the... Ooh, more water. Thank you very much. Maybe a word on the business side of things. Which type of early customers or what kind of industries, I guess, do you guys find that this works particularly well with?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of excitement basically from any business that drives a lot of business based on their data and has a rich data set that they want to use to build that personalized experience. So a lot of B2C brands and things like that. Right.
But in sort of commerce or?
All over, yeah.
All over. Okay, great. All right, do we have questions? Microphone somewhere. It's one of the obvious countries. Thank you.
When you come out of stealth, who do you see as the folks you'll be primarily selling to? Is this an IT-oriented sell or a line of business marketing sell?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we've seen with some of our existing customers and the discussions that we're having is because we optimize, because we improve sort of the whole workflow, honestly, there's people from all over that are interested, all the way from the data analysts and the data engineers in their organization to the marketers themselves, to the higher level business people. Honestly, across the board, we've seen interest.
Take this one, and then we'll go over there.
So let's say I'm a WPP. How does your system help me?
What do you mean specifically? Can you elaborate? What?
Well, this is supposed to help generate data on marketing and focus marketing. Mm-hmm. So let's say I'm Gray Group. That helps. And I want to use this system for helping me to target my my production, my development for marketing for my client. How does that work?
Yeah, so some of the things that we would enable, for example, is using the richness of all the data that you have to target across all kinds of different channels to truly build the omni-channel campaigns that everybody strives to see, and to dive deeper into the specific event patterns as some of the examples that I gave, rather than just doing sort of high-level static slicing and dicing.
But otherwise, the core customer is a company, not an advertising agency, but more a company trying to market to their customer.
That's right.
User, right?
That's right.
Another one here, and then we'll do the last one over there. Right here.
Hi. I'm trying to understand how to position you against other competitors in the field. So if I understood correctly, you draw the line in terms of some of the execution service. You're not competing against ESPs, for example. So is it an audience insight platform that has the technology under the covers, but I can do not only list polls, but deep dive insights, and it just makes, I don't need as many technology providers. So I'm trying to understand who you view your competitors to be, which helps me understand a little bit better about how to position the services you offer.
Yeah, it's a great question. So to be honest, I see this as sort of a new market creation. There's a few other players out there, but we haven't really seen anybody thinking about it in this way. And specifically, you mentioned ESPs, for example. As you said, we're not replacing those guys. In fact, we connect with all those guys, and that's the way that we enable an omni-channel campaign, is by easily connecting with all your different execution channels. But we provide that data layer that gives the richness of data to all of those. And you also mentioned insights. Insights is a strong part of the product, but it's just the beginning. Because at the end of the day, and it comes all the way down to the name, you can only do something useful if you actually drive action. And so it's that hybrid mix of the insights together with the execution that really adds a lot of value from what we've seen.
So some enterprises might have already existing data models and databases and whatever they did in the previous years. So would your product work with that? And how would you integrate, like what is expected from the customer to, like, do I have to stream the data or do you work with my existing schema?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with first-party data. We work with third-party data as well. But we've been able to plug into a variety of different data warehouses with a variety of different data models very easily, again, because of some of the things that I mentioned. And we can work with streaming data. We can work with, I mean, we've had experience in all these sorts of places and have done these integrations already.
Great. On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.